respected Chairman Professor Pradip Basu, distinguished members of the audience, and my dear students. For me, yes, of course, it's a very happy occasion that this Marx Bicentennial lecture series is being organized in this Department of Political Science, where I studied about 50 years back, and then later I taught here for a short period. So that way, yes, it's a very happy occasion. But at the same time, I must also admit that it's a very, very challenging job. Challenging job for two reasons. One is that the issue that I'm going to address, well, there I will try to make certain observations which are highly tentative. If you ask me that why I'm saying so, I think that will be confirmed when I close the lecture. The other reason is that I was not, frankly speaking, prepared for this kind of gathering. That Marx is still a box office hit. I think that is proved even after 200 years. But frankly speaking, I was not prepared for this kind of gathering. Now, the topic that I have selected, yes, it sounds a bit problematic, somewhat enigmatic. That is, exploring Marx in the post-Soviet era. New frontiers, new perspectives. That means basically two things. Two issues are involved in it. That yes, before the breakup of Soviet Union in 1991, obviously there were studies made on Marx. Marx was very much popular. A large part of the world was dominated by the socialist camp. And that way, yes, Marx was center of attraction in a large part of the academic world. So the question is that if that be so, then why I'm saying that exploring Marx in the post-Soviet era. So does it mean that there was something wrong with the studies of Marx in the Soviet era? This is question number one. The second question is, and that I believe is a much more academic question, that is, can it be said that during the Soviet period, by Soviet period I mean say 1917 to 1991, this long period. So during this period, whatever facts we knew about Marx, and I emphasize the word facts. So whatever facts we knew about Marx, well, is it that in the post-Soviet era, we for the first time came across certain facts which were not known earlier? Is it that certain facts were there, but they were suppressed? We were deprived of the opportunity of knowing certain new facts about Marx, facts which we should have known, but somehow we did not have access to those facts. So keeping these two questions in mind, I have picked up this expression that exploring Marx in the post-Soviet era. If you kindly look at the abstract which has been circulated, you will find that I have split it up broadly into three sections. The first section is, of course, very, very brief, where I have very briefly tried to summarize the way Marx was viewed, Marx was studied, Marx was, say, debated upon in the period before the beginning of the Soviet era. This is one, and I have called it phase one, and that phase one broadly is late 19th century to 1917. That was an era which looked at Marx in a particular way. And during that period also, very interestingly, Marx was not above controversy. Marx was debated upon. Marx gave birth to a large number of fierce disputes. Then we come across the Soviet era. And so far as the Soviet era is concerned, well, there again we come across two phases. One is 1917 to 1945. The other is 1945 to 1991. So I will very, very briefly, because many of these things are known to you, so I will not waste my time in indulging in discussion about all these things, but very briefly. So what was the nature of the debate? What were the issues around which these debates took place? Now, in the first phase, that is late 19th century to 1917. Late 19th century, that means, say, from the time of the death of Engels, that is 1895, to, say, 1917. If we look at this period, then we find that this was the period which was dominated primarily by the Second International. And Second International was dominated, as all of you know, by two leading figures. One is Edward Bernstein and the other is Karl Kautsky. And what was the debate? Basically, centering around Second International. I'm not going into the details. On one level, there was a debate between Rosa Luxemburg and Edward Bernstein. That is, it was basically a debate centering around the question that did Marx espouse a revolutionary path or an evolutionary path? So the question is known as the controversy centering around reformism. So Bernstein was dubbed by Rosa Luxemburg as a revisionist, and Bernstein characterized Rosa's understanding as somewhat left adventurist. So that was a kind of understanding. There was another debate. There were many other debates also, but basically these were some of the representative debates. The other debate was, say, between Karl Kautsky and Lenin. So Lenin considered Kautsky as a kind of, say, believer in a mechanical, deterministic understanding of Marxism, where subjectivity, consciousness, they did not play any proper role. Whereas Kautsky believed that Lenin, like Rosa Luxemburg, say, indulged in a kind of adventurism, emphasizing subjectivity, emphasizing consciousness, etc., etc. So that was the first phase. In the second phase, again, very briefly, 1917 to 1945, that is the first part of the second phase. If we look at it, then we find this is the period where we witness, on the one hand, the establishment of Soviet Marxism, and Soviet Marxism gave birth to a kind of what we popularly characterized as mainstream Marxism. And mainstream Marxism gave birth to a kind of, say, reaction. What kind of reaction? That is commonly known as Western Marxism. And the debate was basically between, say, two issues. One is Soviet Marxism, eventually, in terms of its practice, it became associated with a kind of determinism, a somewhat mechanistic understanding. Whereas Western Marxism emphasized the importance of subjectivity, consciousness. It tried to link Marxism with the Hegelian tradition, etc. etc. I'm not again going into these details. And so it was a debate between objectivity versus subjectivity. Then we come to the second phase of the, second phase of the second phase of the Soviet era. That is 1945 to 1991. Now, in 1945-1991 phase, again we come across, virtually I would say, a revival of the debate between Soviet Marxism and Western Marxism, but in a somewhat different way. This was the time when we, for the first time, in the academic world, thanks to the English translations of many of the writings of Marx, we came across, we had access to economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844, German ideology, etc. Some of the texts which were earlier unknown. And that gave birth to a very important debate, that is young Marx versus mature Marx. So on the side of young Marx, those who believed that young Marx is the real Marx, well, on that side, there was Adam Schaff, then Roger Garudi, etc. Adam Schaff was a Polish Marxist, Garudi was a French Marxist. They were all associated with the French Communist Party, Polish Communist Party, and their claims were contested by another very leading French Marxist of the time, thanks to the impact of structuralism, that is Louis Althusser. So it was a debate between Garudi and Althusser that gave rise to the controversy, young Marx versus mature Marx. Why I'm saying that it was a kind of restatement of the earlier debate between mainstream Marxism and Soviet Marxism? Just for one reason. Just as in the debate between Soviet Marxism and Western Marxism, actually it was a debate between, say, subjectivity and objectivity. So here also, in young Marx versus mature Marx, those who were advocates of young Marx theory, well, their argument was that young Marx had his emphasis on subjectivity and consciousness, and that is the real Marx. Whereas Althusser and Althusser's followers, those who were structuralist Marxists, they believed Marx, the author of Capital, well, he is the scientist Marx. And scientist Marx's emphasis is on objectivity. Objectivity is science. Marxism is not humanism. Marxism is science. In fact, Althusser made an explosive statement that Marxism is theoretical anti-humanism. Anyway, so these were some of the debates which took place during this period. But whatever be the differences, whatever be the issues, there were two things common to these debates. There were two things common to those who were engaged in this debate, despite their otherwise theoretical, ideological differences. One was that each side interpreted Marx with reference to certain selected texts. For example, those who were advocates of young Marx theory, for them, the Bible was economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844. That is the road to Marx. Leave out everything else, EPM or German ideology. That is real Marx. For Althusser, well, these are all, say, works of immature Marx. This is not real Marx. What is real Marx? Capital, 1867, volume 1. That is the Bible. So they just picked up certain texts and put all their emphasis on these texts, interpreted Marx in terms of these texts, and this is how they had their own rating of Marx. This is one thing common to all of them. The other was, I think that is much more important and particularly relevant for the discussion in which I am engaged now. That is, each side viewed Marx as the theorist of a complete system. Marx had built up a system. He was a system builder. As against Hegel, Marx had built up a system. Now, those who were advocates of young Marx theory, they said, well, to understand how Marx built up his system, look at his early writings. Scholars like Althusser, who believed that mature Marx, the author of Capital, is the real Marx, they believed, look at Capital, read Capital, and you will understand how Marx built up his system. And that means, and let me explain this point a little bit, that is why they were looking at Marx like this. That is, Marx as a system builder. Well, why they were engaged in this exercise? I think the main problem in those days was that Marx had to be put to use. Marx had to be used as an instrument. Instrument for what? Instrument for revolution, instrument for changing the world, instrument for understanding the society. But Marx had to be put to an instrumentalist use. Marx is a tool. Marx is a weapon. So Marx has to be appropriated. Both sides looked at Marx in this spirit. And very interestingly, say those who were practitioners of socialism, the whole of the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, China, Vietnam, everywhere, they looked at Marx like this. We have to use Marx in our own way to justify our system. And those again who contested these claims from within the socialist system, they also used Marx, saying, what you are saying, that is not real Marx. Our way of looking at Marx, that is the real way of studying Marx. So Marx has to be used, appropriated, and thereby Marx, the exercise, so far as Marx studies is concerned, it had, by borrowing Marx's expression, it had only on use value. Now I come to the second part. After 1991, the entire scenario changed. Because as you know that in 1991, Soviet Union collapsed and nobody knew now what would happen to Marx. All of us know that during the Soviet period, lots of materials on Marx, Marx's texts, Marx's studies, Marx's writings, these were available. So, what would happen now? To understand this point, we have to look at another current which ran parallel to what I have just stated. These were all polemics, controversies. But side by side, there was another current, but which remained somewhat ignored, understated. To understand this current, now if you ask me, Why emphasizing this current? Because only by understanding the importance of this alternative current, parallel current, only by understanding how this current developed, we will be able to understand where Marx stands today, in the 21st century, in the post-Soviet era, how we can look at Marx. To understand this point, we have to go back to the year 1911. What happened in 1911? In our standard textbooks on Marx and Marxism, whether it is by Kolakowski or by David McClellan, all the standard books, you will never, nowhere come across these things. Because as I said, it has never been studied. What happened in 1911? In the year 1911, in the famous historic city of Vienna, a group of Austro-Marxists, they had a small gathering, and one of the leading figures in that gathering was David Borisovich Ryazanov, who later became very famous when, in the Soviet era, mainly on the initiative of Lenin, he was appointed director of the Marx Engels Institute in Moscow. But that story came later. In 1911, in that small gathering of Austro-Marxists, Ryazanov was not an Austro-Marxist. He was initially a Menshevik. Later he joined the Bolshevik party. But Ryazanov was a leading figure. Now, what happened to, what about Ryazanov? Why I am referring to Ryazanov? Because Ryazanov was an astounding figure. Ryazanov knew a number of languages, and he was rooted in Marx. His idea was, and that was picked up by, that was shared by the Austro-Marxists, his idea was this: let us take up a project of publication of the complete legacy. Now this is very important, complete legacy of Marx and Engels. This project, theoretically and officially, was taken up in that meeting in Vienna in the year 1911. This project of publishing the complete writings of Marx and Engels, well, this project was called MEGA, Marx Engels Gesamtausgabe. That is a typical German expression. Gesamtausgabe, that means complete works, complete writings. And actually, how many writings of Marx would be published? Where from funding would come? These things were discussed. But before the project matured, in 1914, the First World War broke out. The project was disturbed. Then came 1917, the Russian Revolution. Ryazanov joined the Bolshevik party. I'm not going into that story. That is a biography of Ryazanov that is very, very interesting. it's a fascinating biography. But I'm not going into those details here. I'm simply saying that this project, which was initiated in the year 1911, that was the brainchild of David Ryazanov. Now, after the revolution, as I have just stated, on the initiative of Lenin, the Marx-Engels Institute was formed, and Ryazanov was made director by Lenin himself. Now, after he became the director, the biographical accounts of Ryazanov, which are now available, unfortunately, most of the materials now are in German, some of them are in Russian. But for the convenience of the audience, I'll use only the English sources. So, this mega, it eventually came to be known as Mega 1. Why Mega 1? Because Mega 1 later was followed by Mega 2. So that story that's a different story. I will come to that later. Now, what was Ryazanov's plan? Because Lenin gave him full authority to work out his ideas. Now, what was Ryazanov's plan? Very interesting. There were three main issues which were addressed by Ryazanov. And incidentally, let me point out one very important thing. That is, Ryazanov's biographies, which are now coming out, these biographies now suggest, and in fact, Ryazanov himself made this confession, that when I was made the director of the Marx Engels Institute, our country was passing through very hard times. There was famine, there was the challenge of the civil war, there was the challenge of illiteracy. So money was a huge problem. But I was given all facilities. Lenin himself told me that yes, that is the Soviet government gave me all possible necessary funds to work out my project. So what was that project? It was actually a dream project of Ryazanov. So three issues were addressed by him. The first was, Mega would incorporate everything produced by Marx Engels in the original language. There would be no editing. So it may be German, it may be French, it may be English, it may be any other language. So there would be no editing. Read Marx Engels in original, because that will give you an understanding of the spirit of their writings. No translation. This is number one. Second, each text would be supplemented with what Ryazanov calls a German word, apparat. Apparat means apparatus. Each text would have a kind of, say, guideline. That is, each text would be annotated. Almost every line would be annotated. Where from Marx picked up his ideas? Was there any draft before he completed the final text? Was there any rethinking on the part of Marx or Engels? Everything would be there. So apparat would be a highly professional exercise to be done by Marx scholars, specialists. And then number three, that is most important. Mega would be divided into 3 sections. The first section is that all published writings of Marx and Engels, those writings which were published in their lifetime, they would be included. First part. In their lifetime, or say even after their death, but which came out in print, which were available in the public domain. So all of them would be included in the first section of Mega. So it was titled like this, Mega 1-1. Then it will be followed by Mega 1-2. What would be Mega 1-2? Mega 1-2 is all works, all writings before and after the publication of Capital. Everything related to Capital. And third, correspondence, letters. Now this is a very fascinating, because now we are coming across for the first time that Ryazanov's whole plan was to publish not only letters exchanged between Marx and Engels, but letters written to them by third parties. And at the moment, the data that is available suggests that there were about 10,000 letters received by Marx and Engels from third parties. So all of them would be published. Figure is like this, approximately 4,000 letters written by Marx and Engels, 10,000 letters received by Marx and Engels, and of these 4,000 letters, there were at least 2,500 letters exchanged between Marx and Engels. So all of them will be published in origin. So that was, broadly speaking, the scheme of Ryazanov. But then something happened. Something very bizarre and something very strange. Lenin died in the year 1924. Ryazanov was sacked, removed in the year 1931, executed in the Moscow trial in 1938. And Ryazanov was replaced by a leading academician who was also very closely associated with the Bolshevik party, that is Adoratsky, academician Adoratsky. So Adoratsky, he actually assumed the directorship of Marx Engels Institute. Now the question is that why Ryazanov was removed. To understand this fact, we have to look at the style of functioning of Ryazanov. And that was his fault line. That was his mistake. It was all permissible as long as Lenin was alive. After that, the situation changed. Now, what was Ryazanov's style of functioning so far as the planning of Mega, the working out of the idea of Mega was concerned? To understand this point, I will very briefly focus on two things. Ryazanov, well, how did he execute the work? How did he realize his plan? He was given, as I said, full authority, full responsibility to work out his project. As I said, he already in the year 1911, he had built up very good links with the Austro-Marxists. Then he built up very good relationship with the Social Democratic Party of Germany, SPD. And this was very, very important for Ryazanov. Because after the death of Engels in 1895, the entire legacy of Marx and Engels, all their books, all their materials, everything was deposited in the archives of the SPD. SPD became the legal heir of the legacy of Marx and Engels. So David Ryazanov established links with SPD leadership, with Bernstein in particular, and eventually he was able to arrive at this agreement that yes, all materials on Marx and Engels which were archived by the SPD, these would be photocopied. That is, they would be allowed to be photocopied, and they will be stored in the Marx Engels Institute under the direct supervision of David Ryazanov. That was understood, and that is how he proceeded. So thousands and thousands of photocopies, they began to arrive in Moscow. The whole project was being supervised by Ryazanov. But the point is, and the problem is, that yes, you are storing materials of Marx and Engels, photocopies. But the point is, who will work on them? Particularly, there was one problem, some of you are aware of it. Marx's handwriting was terribly bad. It was almost impossible to decipher Marx's handwriting. Besides that, you had to be a very good scholar of Marx. What was the background of this manuscript? How did he write it? That is, you have to understand the mind of Marx. And for that, the data that we get now, again from biographies of Ryazanov, that is, by the year 1930, just 1 year before he was removed, he had 109 staff members. And out of these 109 staff members, only 39 members, they had party membership. They were members of the Bolshevik Party. They were associated with the Bolshevik Party. The remaining members, who were they? They were ex-Mensheviks, socialist revolutionaries, not connected with any party. They were all engaged by Ryazanov. Because Ryazanov has only one concern: scholarship, academic concern, intellectual concern. Can you read Marx's handwriting? Do you know his background? Do you know the nature of this manuscript? And very interestingly, just a small, not anecdote, but just to say 2 small episodes. This was the time when Ryazanov was building up his institute with the help of all these people. 2 persons. One is young Georg Lukács. Georg Lukács, he was in this institute at that time. And Lukács is one of his, say, autobiographical accounts which refers to this period. Lukács says, well, I was very young at the time, and I had the opportunity of working in Marx Engels Institute, but by the time Lukács is saying all these things, Ryazanov is gone. But he is working there, and he says that I had the opportunity, rare opportunity, of going through the original manuscript of Marx's economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844. And I had a strange feeling that I am going through the original handwriting of Marx, 1844, and many of these pages have been, say, they are lost. Some of the pages have been, say, they have rotted, they have been eaten up by worms. But I'm going through these pages of economic and philosophy. It was discovered for the first time by Ryazanov and published for the first time in the year 1932. Then another person, some of you perhaps know his name, is a very distinguished American scholar, Sidney Hook. Sidney Hook, in his young days, in the year 1927, he was there in Marx Engels Institute. So many other leading figures of the time, well, they worked, and David Ryazanov, well, he invited them. Now, obviously you can ask me, so what was the problem? This was the problem. That is, David Ryazanov is inviting non-Bolsheviks, non-party men to work in this institute. You are taking the help of scholars and people who cannot be trusted. As I said, only 39 were party members. So you are a person who cannot be trusted by the party leadership. This was the main reason, and especially because of his old Bolshevik past, Ryazanov was branded as an enemy of the people, the dreaded phrase in the Stalin period, the enemy of the people. So Ryazanov was also branded as the enemy of the people. He was sacked, eventually arrested. This period, very little of it is known actually. But eventually this much is known, that in 1938, in the infamous Moscow trial, well, he was executed. I am at this point referring to just a few articles, because I know that after this session will be over, many of you will ask me that where we get these facts, where are the materials. So I am just reading out. One is, there are two articles, they are available online, all related to the history of the Mega project, how Mega developed, how Mega 1 eventually became Mega 2, I'm coming to that, etc. One is, all of them are German, two of them are German. One is Rolf Hecker, History and Meaning of the Mega Project from its inception till 1990. It's an online, available on internet. The other is Jürgen Royan, he is a Dutch scholar, publishing Marx and Engels after 1989, The Fate of the Mega. It's available again on internet. Nature, Society and Thought, Volume 13, Number 4, October 2000. And by the same author, a Mega Update, same journal, Volume 14, Number 3, July 2001. Then a very extremely informative Chinese scholar. Chinese scholars are very much interested, Chinese and Japanese scholars. They are very much interested in the exploration of Marx in the light of Mega. His name is Yulan Zhao. It's a 3-part article. That is historical birth of the first historico-critical edition of Mega. Parts 1 to 3, available on internet. Then a very famous leading scholar who is working on this thing. In fact, he came to the Department of Political Science, Presidency University, just a few years back. His name is the Italian scholar Marcello Musto. So Marcello Musto, his article, The Rediscovery of Karl Marx, a review essay. It was published in a very famous journal published by the International Institute of Social History, Amsterdam, The name of the journal is International Review of Social History, number 52, 2007. So, after this, the question that becomes very important is that, well, this was the fate of Ryazanov understanding. But then what happened? What happened to Mega? Was it closed down? That is, if somebody asks the question, very normal, natural question, that with the sacking of David Ryazanov, was Mega 1 also sacked? No. Thankfully, no. Mega 1 continued under the directorship of Adoratsky. And during that period, by that period I mean the period, say, up to the beginning of the Second World War. Obviously, during the war, all activities, well, came to a close. But till the beginning, say that is till the end of 1938 or beginning of 1939, yes, some of the volumes, according to Ryazanov's plan of work, so some volumes, as I said, there would be 3 parts, some under part 1, some under part 2, some under part 3. So some about 14, 15 volumes, they were published under Mega 1. But obviously the question is, what happened thereafter? Yes, the Second World War came, Second World War was a major intervention. It disrupted the entire work of Mega. Then the Second World War came to an end, 1945. Then what happened? Stalin died in 1953. Then came the historic 20th Congress of the Soviet Communist Party in 1956. After 1956, Mega project was revived simultaneously now in 2 countries. One is Soviet Union, the other is German Democratic Republic, that is East Germany. Under the auspices of 2 institutes, Institute of Marxism-Leninism, under the control of the Central Committee of the Soviet Communist Party, and the other is, again, Institute of Marxism-Leninism, under the control of the Central Committee of the Socialist Unity Party of Germany. So these 2 institutes now started collaborating in the implementation of 2 simultaneous projects. One project was to come out with the works of Marx and Engels. In German they called it Werke, works. And the other is Gesamtausgabe, the complete works, the Mega. That would be Mega 2. So obviously at this point the question will arise, so what was the difference between Werke and Mega 2? The difference was that, first of all, Werke, or the works, this would be translation. In Russian also they came out simultaneously with a Russian edition of the works of Marx and Engels, but that would be in Russian translation. In German, most of the writings obviously were in German, but there were many writings of Marx and Engels, particularly many letters written in English or French, so they were translated into German. That is, these would be edited versions, edited writings, number 1. Number 2, in the Werke version of Marx and Engels' writings, not everything would be included. Many writings, many drafts, many notes would be excluded. Mainly works of Marx and Engels, which were available in complete or semi-complete form, they would be published under Werke. And the most interesting difference is this. The idea was Werke would be completed more or less in about 50 volumes, whereas Marx Engels, that is Mega, this complete works of Marx and Engels, that would exceed perhaps 150 volumes. So that would be the difference. So that shows the magnitude of the work, that is mega. Why mega is so important. And so far as, and incidentally, I think that point I should right now point out. As far as I remember, I think it was sometime in the beginning of the 80s, maybe late 70s, when we in the English-speaking world began to come across the publication of the collected works of Marx and Engels. The collected works of Marx and Engels, you have seen these volumes, these thick white volumes. Now, these collected works of Marx and Engels were also more or less completed in about 50, maybe 50 plus volumes. This collected was the English version of Marx and Engels' collected works. That was virtually the English replication of Werke. Not mega, but Werke. So CW or collected works or Werke more or less have the same status. Now, very interestingly, here one point should be kept in mind. David Ryazanov was executed in 1938. Nobody talked about him any longer because he was a forbidden name. But if you look carefully in your libraries at the collected works of Marx and Engels, 50 volumes, that is the English version of the Werke edition, then you will find that structure of Ryazanov was followed to the letter. First, the published writings of Marx and Engels in the first volumes. In the second part, capital and related writings. In the third part of collected works, say I think, say volume, maybe volume 30 or 35, from there it is only letters. That was Ryazanov's original structure. And the same structure prescribed by David Ryazanov, that was followed when Mega 2 project was now being worked out by the GDR and USSR. The same thing, that three-part thing, that threefold formula of David Ryazanov, and most importantly, apparat. Every text would be followed by an apparat. If you are interested, some of these Mega 2 volumes are available on internet. Some of them, not all of them. And if you click Google and search for these materials, then you will find, if you are interested, so how this Mega 2 and Mega 2's structure, Mega 2's orientation, Mega 2's style is quite different from Werke or collected works. Now, there is another thing which is very, very important. That is, if you carefully look at the English version of Werke, that is the collected works of Marx and Engels, then you will find each text is followed by extensive notes. Extensive notes at the end. Most of these notes, it is not mentioned, but most of these notes actually have been taken from the apparat, mega apparat. So these notes, so collected works incorporates, without mentioning, without naming, many of the materials which are there in mega. Now I come to a very crucial question. That is, yes, as long as Soviet Union was there, GDR was there, yes, Mega 2 continued. A number of volumes came out. Werke was completed. But then what happened? In 1989, the Berlin Wall collapsed. In 1991, Soviet Union ceased to exist. So what happened thereafter? What happened was, and this is a very interesting story, that is, by 1989, it was clear Soviet Union still was there, but Soviet Union was in its last phase. By 1989, when German unification took place, GDR ceased to exist. Then the Moscow Institute of Marxism-Leninism and the GDR Institute of Marxism-Leninism, they now made an appeal to the International Institute of Social History, Amsterdam, that can we think of, say, a continuation of the Mega, because bad days are ahead. Now, why Amsterdam International Institute of Social History? Because after the war, actually the biggest repository of Marx Engels' writings, which were earlier there in the SPD archive, they were now all transferred to International Institute of Social History. Large part of it, almost 70%. And remaining about 25-30%, they were stored in Moscow's Institute of Marxism-Leninism. So they approached Amsterdam Institute that can we think of, how can we think of continuing the Mega project? Because as I said, terrible days are ahead. Amsterdam Institute agreed that yes, we can think of it. And then what happened? After actually it started in 1990, because it was already in the air that USSR is coming to an end. So what happened was, in the year 1990, a very important step was taken. A foundation was established. It was called International Marx Engels Foundation. And that was formed in 1990, just 1 year before the collapse of USSR. And then in 1993, Berlin Brandenburg Academy of Sciences joined this foundation. And then, to cut a long story short, so far as funding is concerned, it was now proposed by the year 1993 that Germany, then Holland, then European Union, and Russia after, that is the end of USSR. So Russian Federation, Germany, Holland, and European Union, they would all come together and fund the working of this project. So now what happened was, Mega 2 continued. But, and this is very, very important, Mega 2 continued, but in a new spirit. In a new spirit means that here you will get some very interesting data. I'm not repeating it. But what I would like to emphasize, it is there, but I'd like to elaborate it slightly. That is, those who now took charge of this Mega project, They said that yes, this is, you can say, a kind of new version of Mega 2. It is Mega 2, but it is a new version. So how the new version of Mega, that is, will be different from the old version of Mega 2. So new Mega 2 and old Mega 2, how they are different. That is crucial for understanding Marx in the 21st century. Those who were in charge, they said, yes, first of all, we have to more or less work out a plan. Originally, it was felt, as I have already pointed out, about 160 or 170 volumes would be published. No, that is not possible. About 114 volumes, that is our target. And probably by the year 2025, maybe all the volumes will come out. Some of the volumes have already come out. What was their original plan? Everything is there in the section 2, the end of section 2 of the abstract. But what is most important is this Mega 2 new version, it adopted certain principles. The first principle is very significant. Marx, Engels' complete writings, the entire legacy of Marx and Engels, well, it would be published, but without any party control. So party control would not be there. It would be a scholarly, academic, intellectual exercise. Number one. And incidentally, that point has been put here. That is, when this Mega 2 new version was launched, then a question came up, what will now happen to the volumes that came out under old version of Mega 2? They were party controlled. They were controlled by GDR Institute of Marxism-Leninism, CPSU's Institute of Marxism-Leninism. So what is this academic intellectual status? So a commission was established. I have stated it in the abstract. And then the commission, interestingly, arrived at the finding. It was actually led by a German philosopher from Munich University. Ultimately, they arrived at the finding that no, Mega 2 will be continued, Mega 2 old version, because the standard of, the scholarly standard of Mega 2 old version, despite party control, it fully matches the European intellectual standard, absolutely scholarly. So there was no compromise so far as academic quality, intellectual rigor of old version of Mega 2 was concerned. So, but this was a very important editorial principle, that Mega 2 will be continued, new version will be continued, but without any party control. Another very important step that was taken, and that I think was a gigantic step, that actually has transformed our understanding of Marx. They said, in addition to these 3 sections originally prescribed by David Riazanov, we are adding a 4th section. What is that 4th section? That 4th section actually involves publication of the notebooks of Marx and Engels. Now, what is meant by these notebooks? So far as notebooks are concerned, the data that is now available is approximately Marx had 200 notebooks he had prepared. And these notebooks about what? That shows Marx's mind, Marx's method of research, Marx's method of reading, Marx's method of writing. His style was this. He used to take down notes, extensive notes, extracts from books, sometimes with marginal notes, marginal comments, sometimes without comments. Ryazanov was aware of these things, but Ryazanov did not have the time to include them in his proposed outline. But Ryazanov knew about it. And Ryazanov, in fact, has pointed out at in one of his writings, one of his pieces, that if we carefully look at Marx's notebooks, then what we find is very interesting. That is, even where Marx has simply taken down notes, where he has made simply some marginal comments, or where he has not even made any marginal comments, the way he has arranged the notes, that shows the direction of his mind, how he is working. Because, in fact, if you read Capital, Volume 1, if you read, say, many of his writings in the New York Daily Tribune, his journalistic writings, many of these writings were preceded by notes. And these notebooks, which have now come down to us, they are prepared, say, between 1838 and 1882. And these notebooks, again, very interestingly, are available. That is, Marx has taken down these notes in ancient Greek, because he knew Greek, Latin, German, Russian, French, Italian, and Spanish. And the problem is, he has taken down these notes by using a multilingual style. He has made some comments, marginal comments. Part of it is in English, part of it in German, part of it is in French. That's how Marx's mind worked. Now I come to the last phase. Some of the things are there, but because of time constraint, I'm not going into those elaborate things. The last part. That is, if someone asks the question that has Mega 2, new version, changed our understanding of Marx? Now, here I have tried to emphasize basically 3 points. One is Paresh Chattopadhyay, a very leading, in fact, there are 2 Indian scholars who had access to Mega, who have worked on Mega. One is Pradip Bakshi, who lives in Calcutta. He was the first person who actually brought out or published the mathematical manuscripts of Marx years back. So Pradip Bakshi and Paresh Chattopadhyay, they are the only 2 Indian scholars who have actually worked through the Mega volumes. Anyway, so Paresh Chattopadhyay has made a very interesting point that if we go through Marx's notebooks and situate Marx's writings in the light of these notebooks, then what we find is that Marx actually makes a difference, and that is the kind of statement that Marx has made in Capital. That is, before I present something means I am presenting something in a kind of organized form. But what is most important is that before I present something, I have to satisfy myself about my investigation. So presentation is secondary, investigation is primary. And here Actually, Paresh Chattopadhyay refers to one or two, say, reflections made by Marx's daughter, Eleanor Marx. Eleanor Marx's reflection on her father's style of functioning, method of working, where she says that my father was a restless mind, never satisfied with anything. He has written drafts, notes, then destroyed. Why? Because he feels it is not up to the mark. It is insufficient. It is inadequate. It is not proper. So this searching, investigating mind, that is something which we can pick up from these mega volumes. This is number one. Number two, that is again a completely new, I would say, discovery of Marx. It was never known to us. We all know that Marx was actually a philosopher. Essentially, he was a philosopher. But very interestingly, Marx was also engaged in studies of chemistry, geology, physics, mathematics, physiology, world history, technology. What is the evidence? These notebooks. Notebooks on chemistry, geology, physics. Now the question, Marcello Musto, for example, has raised this question in one of his articles. Why Marx was interested in these things? One or two scholars, I'm not going into the details because that will take another hour. So, very briefly I'm stating, some scholars, the names are mentioned here in brackets. They, in their writings, reflecting on Mega, they point out that yes, this is a very intriguing question. What made Marx interested in so much in science and technology? And so much so that now we come across the fact that Marx, in fact, when he was writing Capital volume, after he completed volume 1 of Capital, well, he suspended work on volume 3 of Capital. Why he kept volume 3 of Capital suspended? And instead, during this time, he is taking down extensive notes on these subjects. So, one scholar, he has, in fact, this is a very interesting, Martin Hund. So, he has tried to relate two things, and perhaps it's a kind of point that should be considered. He points out that no, it's not that Marx suspended his work, he became suddenly disinterested in Capital and switched over. No, there was an integral connection between the two. Because Marx was interested in understanding, exploring the impact of modern technology, impact of modern science on social life, on the development of capitalism, and eventually what kind of ecological implications it can have for society. That was Marx's concern. So unless you understand the nature of modernity, you cannot understand, you cannot actually explore this question. So you have to be familiar with the new advances made in the field of science, physics, mathematics, chemistry. He has extensive notes on calculus. So that was Marx. So this is another thing. And then the third point, that is very, very crucial. That is, I will give you just one instance. So I have brought the text actually. That is, as asking the question or raising the question, that how has mega or familiarity with mega transformed our understanding? So I will refer to just two issues. One, a controversy has developed in recent writings. I'm not going into the details. That is Capital Volume 3. It was published by Engels years after Marx's death. That is, Marx did not publish it. The question is that this edited version of Marx's Capital Volume 3, edited by Engels, how far authentic it was? A very big question has come up. Why this question has come up? And this question has led to a very serious controversy. There are some scholars who believe that yes, Engels edited the volume 3 of Marx, but Engels never claimed that I am the co-author of this volume. Author is Marx. And they argue that yes, that editing was necessary. Why editing was necessary? Because Marx left the manuscript of volume 3, which is now available thanks to Mega. It was not available earlier. Now for the first time, the original manuscript of volume 3, unfinished, incomplete manuscript of Marx, that has come up. Now the question is that this incomplete manuscript of Marx, of volume 3, well, it was so fragmentary, it was so sketchy, that nobody could make head or tail of it. So Engels felt that it is my political responsibility, it is my intellectual duty to complete the thing, to give it a meaningful shape and to bring it out. In fact, if you just take a look at the introduction of Engels in the volume 3, long introduction, there in fact in the first part of the introduction, Engels makes it quite clear that yes, what I got was something which just cannot be published. But I thought that Marx's work should come out in the open. People should know that he was working on it. But Marx was no longer there. So I took up the job to bring it out. But if I have to bring it out, then I have to give it a meaningful shape. But I did not, say, consciously intervene. I did not distort anything. Whatever was available, I tried to give it a meaningful shape. But those who are opposed to this argument, there is a group of scholars, I mentioned it there, they point out that no, Engels did not do the right thing. Because once you have edited Marx's writing, you have taken away the spirit of Marx. That is, we cannot, the problem was, till now, till the availability of the original manuscript of Marx's volume 3, unfinished manuscript, we used to know Capital in the form of 3 volumes, volume 1, volume 2, volume 3. And we thought this volume 3 was the authentic edition. Now the scholars argue, volume 3 you cannot say authentic, because it is not Marx's original version. It is Engels' edited version. So whole question, I think you can now, you get the point, that the whole exploration of Marx in the post-Soviet era has shifted from the way Marx was used as an instrument to a new kind of, the whole focus has changed. That is, Marx's mind we have to understand. So we are no longer interested in using Marx. We are interested in understanding the mind of Marx. So how his mind worked. And I now come to a very interesting episode. All of you know it. But I think something else also we should know. Thanks to Mega. That is very famous Marx's thesis on Feuerbach. Everybody knows it. Now, till the Mega volumes came out, we used to know Marx's thesis on Feuerbach. I am reading from Moscow edition, Marx Engels Selected Works. That was in 1960, just a minute, yes, 1962. This is the English version of Marx's thesis on Feuerbach. This was known to all of us. At the end of the last thesis, the famous 11th thesis of Feuerbach, the note is given, written by Marx in the spring of 1845. Then another statement, originally published by Engels in 1888 in the appendix to the separate edition of Engels' piece on Ludwig Feuerbach, translated from the German, printed according to the text of the separate 1888 edition and checked with the manuscript of Karl Marx. Now, this is not Marx's original thesis on Feuerbach. Marx's original thesis on Feuerbach, yes, it was published, it was never published. What happened was, Marx's original thesis on Feuerbach, there was no title. It was discovered in one of the notebooks of Marx. And it was just written what Marx meant by that, because Marx was an absolutely unpredictable thinker. It was written in small piece, underlined, AD, Feuerbach, nothing else. Then the 11 theses are there. Then what happened? Engels in the year 1888, yes, he brought out and published it. This is the English version that we know, or the circulated version. That is not the original 1845 version of Marx. This is Engels' edited version. Now, if you can obviously raise a very important question. Did Engels' editing in 1888 change the 1845 version of Marx? Yes. How did it change? I'm just reading out one or two. There are many changes. Just one or two. In the original version, that very famous 11th thesis of Feuerbach, all of you know it. What was the original version? The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. Interpreted, underlined in Marx's original manuscript. The point is to change it. Change, underlined. Okay? Now, Engels' edited version. The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. Yes, interpreted, underlined. The point, however, is to change it. That was Engels' edition. Similarly, the last three theses They have been changed. Thesis 10, original version. The standpoint of old materialism is civil society. The standpoint of the new is human society or social humanity. That is Marx's original manuscript, translated version, English. Then Engels' edited version. The standpoint of the old materialism is civil society. Civil, inverted commas, underline. It was not there in Marx's original. The standpoint of the new in Marx's original version is human society or social humanity. In Engels' version, the standpoint of the new is human society. All right. In Marx's original version, human not emphasized. Here, human is emphasized. Then, instead of social humanity, Engels uses the word associated humanity. And very, very important, very suggestive, very subtle. Thesis 9. Thesis 9, original version, Marx. The highest point reached by contemplative materialism, that is materialism which does not comprehend sensuousness as practical activity, is the contemplation of single individuals and of civil society. Marx's original version. Engels' original version, thesis 9. The highest point, ... contemplative materialism, etc. Then, is the contemplation of single individual, in Marx's original version, of civil society, here in civil society. The orientation changes. Now, I am stating all these things because that gives you that gives us a completely new perspective. That is, if we are interested in reading Marx's mind, not in just using Marx. In fact, the question arises, can we use Marx? Is Marx a kind of, say, use and throw kind of things? And finally, I stop. I think now is the time that I should stop. So we raise actually a number of questions, debatable questions. These have now come up. Many of them are being investigated. Many of them have remained unexplored. Many of them will give rise to further debates. But just for our understanding, I have made a catalogue of these 4 prospective questions. The first question is, in our traditional mainstream understanding of Marxism I would say, not Marx, we were given to understand all the time, in all the Soviet publications or official Communist Party publications, we always used to put the 2 names together. Marx, Engels, identity of views. The point that has been raised now by the scholars is, should we use the word identity, Marx, Engels identity, or commonness? Yes, there were many things common to them, but they were not identical. Marx's mind was different from Engels' mind. That does not mean that Marx was superior or Engels was inferior, but they are different. You have to recognize the notion of difference. That is point number 1. The point number 2, this whole debate with which I started, this young versus mature Marx, that debate no longer works. That debate has become irrelevant. It is not young versus mature Marx. It is Marx in continuum. In fact, there are some scholars who have raised this question that, for example, a Dutch economist, Michel Kretke, he has raised this question that should we use the word, Althusser used this expression, break. Mature Marx breaks with younger. No. Should we use the word break or should we use the word turn? there were turning points in Marx's writings. So instead of break, perhaps we should use the word turn. And number three, Engels says, was there any real division of labor between Marx and Engels? Because there is a common understanding that Marx was primarily interested in literature, philosophy, history, whereas Engels was interested, say, in science, technology, dialectics of nature, for example. That was Engels' word. Engels used the word dialectical materialism, historical materialism. It was never used by Marx. So there was a neat division of labor. Now, mega volumes for the first time suggest that no, Marx was no less interested in science and technology. These notebooks, they state that yes, Marx was interested in all these things. So there was no such clear division of labor. There was a kind of overlapping. And finally, did Engels' editorial intervention affect Marx's original texts? In some cases, as in the thesis of Feuerbach, yes. In some cases, no. Kretschke, for example, he argues that no, the mega volume suggests that yes, there were editorial interventions. Sometimes it is estimated there were more than 5,000 interventions made by Engels in Marx's texts. But that does not mean that Engels distorted the texts. So, yes, at some points Engels' interventions perhaps unknowingly, unconsciously, maybe they led to some kind of, say, distortion, but unknowingly. But Engels never claimed that, well, I am the author along with Marx of many of the writings. And so I end up by saying, in fact, some of you perhaps know it, in the year 2009, a very leading scholar who is no longer with us, he was in Calcutta, editor of the famous Bengali periodical Baromash, Professor Ashok Sen, he in an essay, unfortunately it's not mentioned, in the year 2009, The Incomplete Marx, that was the name of the essay. So Professor Sen, in that essay, it is available in that famous Devi Prasad Chattopadhyay and Omiyodev edited series. Original editor is Devi Prasad Chattopadhyay, History of Science, Philosophy and Culture in Indian Civilization series, that famous series. So in that series, volume 15, part 3 of that series, Professor Sen's essay, The Incomplete Marx, there actually he tried to give this hint. And it is this point which has been again and again been emphasized by the Italian scholar Marcello Musto in a number of his writings, especially in an interview given to a Russian journal Logos on 2nd January 2011. It is available on internet. What is their argument? Basically two very important things. That is, Marx was a mind which was ever vibrant, ever restless, and never complete. He never aimed at completion of anything. He never aimed at building up a system. His mind was an investigating mind. Inquiry. That famous motto of Marx, doubt everything. Yes. That was his motto. This is one very important thing, so far as incompleteness of Marx is concerned. This is one thing. The other is that Marx was primarily interested in developing, in understanding historical categories And historical categories are always relative. So, historical categories, Marx never tried to reduce to natural categories. That is, Marx was always conscious of the fact that understanding of history and understanding of nature, understanding of physical world, understanding of human world, they are different. So historical categories don't reduce them to natural categories which are fixed, which are frozen in space and time. Unfortunately, the way Marx has been used in the past, our problem was we actually transformed Marx into a naturalist. Marx, the historian, was transformed into Marx, a naturalist. That was the problem. So Marx remains incomplete. In the 21st century, perhaps it is our responsibility, thanks to Mega, in the light of Mega, to explore this restless, ever vibrant mind of Marx. Thank you.